The transport ship's metal floor vibrated beneath Zara Chen's boots as she stood among the other new arrivals on Kepler Station. Around her, beings from across the galaxy shuffled forward in the processing line. Towering Vorthak, with their crystalline skin, caught the harsh fluorescent light. Sleek Meridian delegates glided past on silent hover platforms. And there, commanding attention from every corner of the massive docking bay, stood the Lycans. Even among the diverse crowd, the wolf-like aliens were impossible to ignore. Their muscular frames easily dwarfed most other species, and their pack mentality was evident in how they moved together. At their center stood someone who could only be their leader. Alpha King Fenris Blackmane was everything the stories claimed. 7 feet of pure predator wrapped in midnight fur, with eyes like molten gold that seemed to evaluate everything as either prey or threat. Zara pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. The climate control on the station ran cold, but that wasn't why she was covering up. Hidden beneath the worn fabric of her Earth military surplus jacket was something that had already caused her enough trouble during the journey here. A tattoo that most beings dismissed as primitive human body art. Next, the processing clerk's voice cut through her thoughts. She stepped forward to the scanning station where a bored-looking Centaurian official barely glanced up from his datapad. Purpose of visit to the Galactic Council territories? He droned. Trade representative for Earth, Zara replied, handing over her credentials. I'm here for the Resource Negotiations Summit. The clerk's 4 eyes flicked up at her with mild interest. Humans were still relatively new to galactic politics, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. Most species viewed them as an upstart race with more ambition than sense. Duration of stay? 3 months, pending negotiation outcomes. As the clerk processed her documents, Zara became aware of a commotion behind her. A group of Leakin youth had noticed her in line and were making comments just loud enough for her to hear. Look at the little human, one sneered, his words carrying the distinctive growling undertone of his species. They actually think they deserve a seat at the table. I heard they paint themselves with permanent markings, another added with obvious disgust. Barbaric creatures. What's next? Are they going to bring their pet dogs as emotional support? The group erupted in barking laughter. Zara's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd heard worse during her military service, and she hadn't survived the Titan mining conflict by letting words get under her skin. Still, the irony wasn't lost on her that beings who looked like giant wolves were mocking humans for having dogs. Approved for temporary residency, Sector 7, Level 12, Hab Unit 247, the clerk announced, sliding her documents back across the counter. Next, as Zara gathered her papers, she felt a presence behind her that made the air itself seem to thicken. Without turning around, she knew exactly who it was. The scent hit her first, wild pine and something indefinably predatory. Then came the voice, a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through her bones. Human. She turned slowly to face Alpha King Fenris. Up close, he was even more imposing. His golden eyes held an intelligence that was both ancient and sharp, and when he spoke, the entire docking bay seemed to quiet around them. Your species has requested access to the tritium mines of Proximus 7, he said, not bothering with pleasantries. A bold move for such a young race. We prefer to think of it as confident, Zara replied evenly. A low chuckle rumbled from his chest. Confidence. Yes, that's one word for it. His gaze swept over her, cataloging details with predatory precision. I am curious to see what arguments your people will present to justify such a request. I suppose you'll find out during the negotiations. Indeed, his eyes lingered on her jacket, and for a moment she wondered if somehow he could see through the fabric to what lay beneath. Tell me, human, do you believe strength comes from markings on the skin? The question caught her off guard, but she kept her voice steady. I believe strength comes from within. Everything else is just decoration. Something flickered in his golden eyes, surprise, perhaps, or amusement. Around them, his pack had grown quiet, watching the exchange with obvious interest. Interesting perspective, he said finally. I look forward to our formal introductions during the summit proceedings. With that, he turned and strode away, his pack falling into formation around him like a military unit. Zara watched them go, her hand unconsciously moving to touch the spot where where her tattoo lay hidden beneath layers of fabric. She had a feeling that the next 3 months were going to be far more complicated than she'd anticipated. The Leakin King's interest in her seemed oddly personal for what should have been a routine diplomatic encounter. And something in those golden eyes suggested he knew more about her than he was letting on. As she made her way toward the residential sector, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Not by security cameras or casual observers, but by something far more dangerous. Something that hunted not just with claws and fangs, but with intelligence and patience. The game, it seemed, had already begun. 3 days into her stay on Kepler Station, Zara had already learned to navigate the complex social hierarchies that govern galactic politics. The morning briefings were held in the Grand Assembly Chamber, where representatives from dozens of species gathered to discuss trade agreements, territorial disputes, and resource allocations. Humans, being the newest members of the galactic community, were typically assigned seats in the back corner, a not-so-subtle reminder of their junior status. Zara didn't mind. From her position, she could observe without being constantly scrutinized. She watched how the Meridians used subtle pheromone releases to influence negotiations. She noted the way the crystalline Vorthack communicated through harmonic frequencies that most other species couldn't detect. And she paid particular attention to the Lycans, who dominated the chamber through sheer physical presence and an intimidation factor that seemed to work on almost everyone. Almost everyone. Your people's proposal regarding Proxima 7 is laughable, Ambassador Corex of the Hegemony announced during that morning session. The reptilian delegate's forked tongue flicked out as he spoke, tasting the tension in the air. Humans lack the technological sophistication to properly extract tritium without contaminating the entire system. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Zara remained silent, taking notes on her datapad while around her, beings from across the galaxy nodded in consensus. It was an old tactic, attack the humans' credibility early and, often, establishing them as unworthy partners before serious negotiations could begin. Furthermore, Corex continued, warming to his theme, their primitive military capabilities make them unsuitable as security partners for such a strategic resource. What protection could they possibly offer against raiders or hostile forces? This time, the murmurs were accompanied by what might have been laughter from several species. Zara looked up from her notes to find Alpha King Fenris watching her from across the chamber, his golden eyes unreadable. When the session ended, Zara made her way to the station's observation deck. The massive transparent aluminum windows offered a spectacular view of the binary star system that powered Kepler Station. She often came here to think, finding the vast emptiness of space somehow calming after the claustrophobic politics of the council chambers. She was so absorbed in watching a cargo freighter navigate between the station's docking arms that she didn't notice the approach of footsteps until a familiar scent reached her. Pine and Predator. She turned to find not just Alpha King Fenris, but 3 members of his inner circle. "You seem remarkably calm for someone whose people were just publicly humiliated," he observed, moving to stand beside her at the window. "Humiliation requires caring about the opinion of those doing the humiliating," Zara replied without looking at him. "Ambassador Corex has been making the same arguments against human involvement for 3 months. His creativity is somewhat limited." A low rumble of amusement came from one of the other Lycans. "She has spirit, this one," he said in the Pack's native tongue. What he probably didn't expect was for Zara to respond in the same language. "Spirit is useful," she said, her accent rough but understandable. "But intelligence is better." The 3 Lycans exchanged startled glances. Their language was notoriously difficult for other species to learn, requiring vocal modifications that most couldn't achieve. Humans weren't supposed to be able to speak it at all. "Where did you learn our tongue?" Fenris asked, his voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity. "Military linguistics program," Zara replied, switching back to standard. "My unit spent 2 years working alongside Leakin mercenary companies during the Outer Rim pacification." "You pick things up." "Mercenary companies," one of the pack members, a scarred female named Vera, said with obvious distaste. "Exiles and outcasts, not true Lycans." "They fought well," Zara said simply. "They died well too, when the time came." The observation deck fell silent except for the distant hum of the station's life support systems. Vera's expression had changed from distaste to something approaching respect. "You fought in the pacification?" she asked. "Titan mining conflict, Kepler rebellion, and 3 smaller actions I'm not supposed to talk about," Zara confirmed. "Spent 8 years in the service before they decided I was better suited for diplomacy than warfare." Fenris stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his massive frame. "Show me," he said quietly. "Show you what?" "Your military markings. The tattoos your people mock you for." Zara's hand moved instinctively to her jacket. Around the galaxy, humans were often ridiculed for their practice of permanently marking their skin. Most species viewed it as primitive, a throwback to their pre-civilized past. But something in the Alpha King's tone suggested he understood more than his words revealed. "Here," she asked, glancing around the observation deck. "My pack knows how to keep secrets," Fenris assured her. After a moment's hesitation, Zara shrugged off her jacket and rolled up the sleeve of her shirt. The tattoo that was revealed made all 4 Lycans step back in shock. It wasn't the primitive body art they'd expected. Instead, wrapped around her left forearm in intricate detail, was a perfect reproduction of a Lycan pack bond marking. The kind of tattoo that could only be earned through blood, battle, and absolute trust. The kind that most Lycans never received, and that no outsider should have been able to replicate. But this wasn't a reproduction. The scarring patterns, the specific placement of the ceremonial marks, the way the ink seemed to shimmer with an almost metallic sheen, everything about it screamed authenticity. "Impossible," Vera whispered. Fenris reached out slowly, his clawed fingers hovering just above the tattoo. "May I?" Zara nodded. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he traced the intricate patterns, his golden eyes growing wider with each detail he confirmed. "This is a first pack marking," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Kaldor's own seal." He looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw something she'd never expected to find there. Recognition. "You're the Ghost Walker." It wasn't a question. The other Lycans had gone completely still, their bodies automatically dropping into respectful postures that spoke of deep instinct and older laws. "I haven't used that name in a long time," Zara said quietly. "The mercenaries you fought with," Fenris continued, his voice gaining strength. "They weren't just any exiles. They were Kaldor's lost pack. The ones who disappeared during the Void War." "They weren't lost," Zara corrected. "They were hunting, following a lead that took them to human space just as the Titan mining conflict erupted. When they realized what was happening, they stayed to help. And you fought beside them." "I fought with them. There's a difference." She looked down at the tattoo, remembering faces that would never again see home. "When Kaldor fell in the final battle, he made me swear to carry word back to your people, to tell them how his pack had died with honor, fighting beside humans who shared their values." "You carry the bond marking of a first pack," Vera said, her voice filled with something approaching awe. "That makes you pack sister to the royal line itself." Fenris nodded slowly, his golden eyes never leaving Zara's face. "The Ghost Walker, who disappeared after delivering Kaldor's final message to our homeworld, who refused all rewards and honors, asking only to be forgotten." "I had a job to do here," Zara said, rolling her sleeve back down. "Diplomatic immunity is useful, but pact bonds create complications." "Indeed they do," Fenris agreed, and there was something in his voice that suggested the complications were just beginning. The revelation of Zara's pact bond changed everything, though the transformation wasn't immediately obvious to outside observers. To most of the galactic community, she remained the same quiet human diplomat, taking notes in the back corner of the assembly chamber and rarely speaking unless directly addressed. But within the Lycan delegation, word of the Ghost Walker's presence spread like wildfire through hidden channels. It started with small things. Vera began nodding respectfully when their paths crossed in the corridors. Other pack members who had previously ignored her would pause in their conversations when she passed, showing the subtle body language of recognition reserved for pack bonds. And Alpha King Fenris himself seemed to watch her with new eyes during formal proceedings. The change didn't go entirely unnoticed. "The dogs seem unusually interested in you lately," Ambassador Corex observed during a break between sessions. The hegemony representative had approached her at the refreshment station, his reptilian features arranged in what might have been meant as a friendly expression. One might wonder what a primitive human could possibly offer to gain their attention. Perhaps they appreciate directness, Zara replied, selecting a nutrition cube from the dispenser. Some species prefer honest communication to political games. Corex's forked tongue flicked out, tasting the air around her. Interesting. You carry an unusual scent, human. Something wild. Dangerous. His eyes narrowed to slits. One might almost think you'd been marked by predators. Before Zara could respond, a new voice cut through the conversation like a blade through silk. Ambassador Corex. Alpha King Fenris materialized beside them with the silent grace that made lichens such effective hunters. I trust you're finding the refreshments satisfactory? The temperature in the immediate area seemed to drop several degrees. Corex's earlier confidence evaporated as he found himself face-to-face with 7 feet of barely controlled predator. Of course, Your Majesty, Corex managed, his voice somewhat strained. I was simply engaging in diplomatic conversation with the human representative. How thoughtful, Fenris replied, his golden eyes never leaving the reptilian's face. Though I should mention that humans have remarkably sensitive hearing. They often detect implications that others might miss. It was a warning, politely delivered, but unmistakably clear. Corex's throat sac pulsed rapidly, a sign of stress among his species. Naturally, if you'll excuse me, I have preparations to make for this afternoon's session. He retreated with as much dignity as he could manage, which wasn't much. That was unnecessary, Zara said once they were alone. I can handle diplomatic pressure. I'm sure you can, Fenris agreed. But pack bonds create certain obligations. Protecting pack members from harassment is among them. Is that what this is about? Obligation? The Alpha King studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Walk with me, he said finally. They left the assembly chamber and entered one of the station's many maintenance corridors. These passages were seldom used except by his service personnel, offering privacy that was impossible to find in the main thoroughfares. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the metal walls, creating an almost intimate atmosphere despite the industrial setting. Tell me about Kaldor's last battle, Fenris said as they walked. You've read the reports. Official reports. I want to hear it from someone who was there. Zara was quiet for several minutes, her footsteps echoing in the narrow corridor. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of old memories. The mining facility was supposed to be lightly defended. Intelligence said maybe 30 corporate security guards, basic weapons, minimal training. We went in expecting a routine operation. She paused at an intersection, checking the corridor markers. Instead, we found a full military garrison. Someone had leaked our mission parameters. A trap. A very good one. They knew exactly how Kaldor's pack operated, knew our insertion routes, knew our communication protocols. We were pinned down in the main processing complex for 18 hours before reinforcements arrived. How many survived of the pack? Just me. And only because Kaldor threw himself between me and a plasma cannon. Zara's voice remained steady, but Fenris could smell the old grief that still clung to her. Before he died, he made me promise to carry word home. Said his pack had found something worth dying for among the humans. They walked in silence for several more minutes before Fenris spoke again. You know what's happening here, don't you? This negotiation, the way the other species are aligned against your people. It's a test, Zara replied. See if humans can be pressured into accepting unfavorable terms. If we back down now, every future negotiation will start from a position of weakness. And if you don't back down, then they'll escalate. Find new ways to isolate us, new pressure points to exploit. She looked at him sideways. The question is whether the lichens will participate in that escalation. Fenris stopped walking, his massive frame filling the narrow corridor. You're asking me to choose between political convenience and pack bonds. I'm not asking you to choose anything. I'm just trying to understand where we stand. Pack bonds are sacred among my people, he said quietly. They transcend politics, transcend convenience, transcend even royal authority. A true pack bond cannot be broken by external forces. But, revealing your connection to Kaldor's pack would complicate things considerably. There are members of the council who would see it as leaking interference in human affairs. Others who would question my objectivity in any negotiations involving your species. So we pretend it doesn't exist. For now, His golden eyes met hers in the dim light, though I suspect that may become increasingly difficult. As if summoned by his words, the corridor's communication system crackled to life. Alpha King Fenris to Assembly Chamber 1 immediately. Emergency session regarding human military capabilities has been called. They looked at each other in the strobing emergency lighting. Let me guess, Zara said dryly. Someone's found evidence that humans are more dangerous than previously believed. It would seem so. Fenris activated his personal communicator. This is the Alpha King. I'll be there momentarily. He closed the channel and looked at her. Will you be attending? I suspect I'm the guest of honor. Then we should go. But Zara... He waited until she met his eyes. Whatever they've discovered, whatever accusations they're planning to make, remember that pack bonds work both ways. You're not alone in this. As they made their way back toward the assembly chamber, Zara couldn't help but wonder what new crisis awaited them. In her experience, emergency sessions were rarely called to deliver good news. And, given the timing, she suspected that someone had been digging into human military records with more thoroughness than was entirely healthy. The game was definitely escalating. The only question was how far the other players were willing to go to win. The emergency session was already in chaos when Zara and Fenris arrived at Assembly Chamber 1. Representatives from dozens of species filled the tiered seating, their voices creating a cacophony of competing languages and dialects. At the center of it all stood High Chancellor Vex of the Meridian Collective, his crystalline features reflecting the chamber's lighting in fractal patterns. Order, he commanded, his voice carrying the harmonic authority that made his species natural leaders. This emergency session will come to order. The noise gradually subsided as delegates took their seats. Zara noticed immediately that she was no longer relegated to the back corner. Instead, an empty chair waited for her in the center of the chamber, surrounded by guards from multiple species. The message was clear. She was no longer just an observer. We are here, Chancellor Vex announced, to address newly discovered evidence regarding the true nature of human military capabilities. Evidence that suggests this species has been deliberately concealing the extent of their dangerous potential. A holographic display materialized above the chamber's center, showing what appeared to be military service records. Zara recognized her own photo among the data streams, along with images of battlefield she'd hoped never to see again. Ambassador Corex of the Hegemony has presented compelling evidence that the human delegation has been operating under false pretenses, Vex continued. Their representative is not merely a diplomat, but a decorated military operative with a history of extreme violence. The reptilian ambassador rose from his seat, his earlier nervousness replaced by obvious satisfaction. Military designation: Lieutenant Colonel Zara Chun, Earth Defense Force Special Operations. Combat record includes participation in 7 major conflicts, 17 classified operations, and confirmed elimination of over 300 hostile combatants. He paused, letting the numbers sink in. This is the being that humanity has sent to negotiate peaceful trade agreements. Murmurs of shock and outrage rippled through the assembly. Several delegates began speaking at once, their voices rising in accusation and concern. Silence. Chancellor Vex's harmonic command cut through the noise. Lieutenant Colonel Chun, you will address these accusations immediately. Zara rose slowly from her chair, her movements calm and controlled despite the hostility radiating from every corner of the chamber. She had faced worse odds than this, though admittedly, usually while armed. The accusations are accurate, she said simply. The chamber erupted again. Delegates shouted questions and demands, their voices blending into an incomprehensible wall of sound. Through it all, Zara remained standing silently, waiting for the storm to pass. You admit to deceiving this council, Vex demanded when order was finally restored. I admit to nothing of the sort, Zara replied. My diplomatic credentials are genuine. My appointment as Earth's trade representative is legitimate. The fact that I have prior military service was never concealed. It simply wasn't relevant to these proceedings. Not relevant, Corex hissed, his throat sac pulsing with excitement. You are a trained killer representing a species that claims to seek peaceful cooperation. How is this not relevant? Because, Zara said, her voice carrying across the silent chamber, Every species in this assembly has military veterans among their diplomatic corps. The hegemony's trade minister served 20 years in their assault forces. The Vorthack delegation includes 3 former war leaders. Even the peaceful Meridians have combat veterans in their government. But none of them, Corex countered, have your particular reputation. The holographic display shifted, showing what appeared to be battlefield footage. Zara watched herself moving through enemy positions with lethal efficiency, her actions clinical and precise. It was strange seeing herself from an outside perspective, like watching a stranger who happened to share her face. "The Ghost Walker," another delegate whispered, and suddenly, the chamber's atmosphere shifted from outrage to something approaching fear. Alpha King Fenris had remained silent throughout the exchange, but now he rose from his seat. The assembly fell quiet as all attention turned to him. "If we are sharing military records," he said, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command, "perhaps we should examine them completely." A new set of images appeared in the holographic display. This time, they showed Leakin warriors fighting alongside human forces, their coordinated tactics speaking of deep trust and mutual respect. "The Void War campaign," Fenris announced. "Joint operations between Leakin forces and human special operations units. I think you'll find the footage illuminating." The images shifted to show Zara working in perfect coordination with a pack of Leakin warriors. She moved among them not as an outsider, but as an integral part of their formation. When one of the Lycans fell to enemy fire, she was the first to reach him, providing cover while others carried him to safety. "The human you see before you," Fenris continued, "fought beside my people for 3 years. She bled with them, mourned with them, and earned their absolute trust through actions that transcended species barriers." "This changes nothing," Corex protested, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "She remains a dangerous predator in diplomat's clothing." "Indeed she does," Fenris agreed. "As are we all. The difference is that she has proven herself capable of protecting those she considers allies, while others in this chamber seem more interested in political manipulation than honest negotiation." The Alpha King's golden eyes swept the assembly, and Zara could see several delegates shifting uncomfortably under his gaze. "I have heard much discussion today about human dangerousness," Fenris said, "but I have seen little evidence that any species in this chamber truly understands what that dangerousness represents." He activated his personal communicator, and new footage appeared in the display. This time, it showed the final battle of the Titan mining conflict. Zara watched herself making the desperate charge that had saved dozens of lives, including several Leakin warriors who would otherwise have been cut down by enemy fire. "Humans are indeed dangerous," Fenris announced. "They are dangerous to their enemies, dangerous to injustice, and dangerous to those who would prey upon the innocent. But they are loyal beyond measure to those they call friends." The chamber had fallen completely silent. Even Corex seemed at a loss for words. "The question before this assembly," Fenris continued, "is not whether humans are dangerous. The question is whether we are wise enough to recognize the difference between dangerous enemies and dangerous allies." Chancellor Vex studied the Alpha King for a long moment before turning his attention back to Zara. "The Leakin King speaks with unexpected passion about your species' character, Lieutenant Colonel. Some might wonder if his objectivity has been compromised. Some might," Fenris agreed pleasantly, "though those same individuals might want to consider the implications of questioning Leakin judgment in matters of combat and loyalty." It was a subtle threat, delivered with diplomatic courtesy, but unmistakable in its intent. The Lycans were the most feared military force in the galaxy, and their alliance was not something to be discarded lightly. "This session is adjourned," Vex announced after a moment of consideration. "We will reconvene tomorrow to discuss the implications of these revelations." As the assembly began to disperse, Zara found herself surrounded by a complex web of political calculations and personal loyalties. The revelation of her military background had changed the game completely, but she wasn't sure if the change worked in humanity's favor or against it. One thing was certain, though. There was no going back to the quiet anonymity she'd maintained for the past 3 days. The Ghost Walker had been revealed, and that revelation would have consequences none of them could fully predict. The attack came at 0300 station time, when most of the diplomatic corps was asleep and security was at its minimum shift rotation. Zara woke to the sound of plasma fire echoing through the corridor outside her quarters, followed by the distinctive howl of Leakin warriors in combat. She rolled out of bed and into her gear in less than 30 seconds, old habits from her military days that she'd never quite shaken. By the time the emergency klaxons began wailing, she was fully dressed and checking the charge on the sidearm she wasn't supposed to have in diplomatic quarters. The corridor outside was chaos. Emergency lighting painted everything in harsh red shadows, and the acrid smell of burned metal and ozone filled the air. Through the haze, she could see figures in black combat armor moving with military precision toward the residential sector where most of the human delegation was housed. Professional, she muttered, recognizing the tactical formation. These weren't raiders or terrorists. Someone had hired a very expensive military contractor to make a statement about human involvement in galactic politics. Her personal communicator crackled to life with Fenris's voice, rough with controlled fury. Zara, report your status immediately. Mobile and armed, she replied, checking the corridor for immediate threats. Multiple hostiles moving on the human delegation quarters. Military-grade equipment and tactics. Stay where you are. Leakin security forces are responding. Negative. If they reach the other humans before your people arrive, this becomes a massacre. She could hear the distinctive whine of energy weapons charging somewhere nearby. I'm moving to intercept. Damn it, Zara, that's an order. You're not my commanding officer, she replied, cutting the channel. The next 5 minutes were pure muscle memory from her special operations days. Moving through the station's maintenance passages, using emergency access routes that most beings didn't know existed, timing her approach to catch the attackers from their weakest angle. The Ghost Walker hadn't earned her reputation by being reckless. She'd earned it by being the person who appeared where enemies least expected her. She reached the main residential corridor just as the assault team was preparing to breach Ambassador Williams' quarters. There were 6 of them, all carrying military-grade plasma rifles, and moving with the coordination of elite professionals. Expensive professionals. Zara didn't give them time to realize they were no longer alone. Her first shot took down the team leader before he could react. The second eliminated their communications specialist. By the time the remaining 4 turned to face this new threat, she was already moving, using the corridor's emergency stations for cover while her shots found their marks with surgical precision. The entire engagement lasted less than 20 seconds. In the sudden silence that followed, Zara heard the sound of running footsteps approaching from both directions. Leakin warriors appeared at one end of the corridor, while station security forces arrived from the other. Both groups stopped short when they saw her standing calmly among the bodies, her weapon already holstered. All threats neutralized, she reported to the lead Leakin warrior. 6 hostiles, professional military contractors. Suggest immediate forensic analysis to determine who hired them. Vera, the scarred female from Fenris's inner circle, approached slowly, her golden eyes taking in the scene with obvious appreciation. Efficient work, she said simply. Clean work, Zara corrected. No collateral damage, no civilian casualties. The professionals they hired were good, but they weren't expecting opposition at this level. 20 minutes later, Zara found herself in an emergency council session that bore little resemblance to the formal proceedings of previous days. Representatives huddled in small groups, speaking in worried whispers about security and the implications of violence on what was supposed to be neutral ground. Chancellor Vex looked older than his crystalline features usually suggested, the weight of responsibility showing in every facet of his expression. The attackers have been identified, he announced. Military contractors from the Outer Rim. Payment traced to a shell corporation with ties to several species represented in this assembly. The chamber erupted in accusations and denials, but Fenris's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The identity of their employers is less important than what this attack represents, he said, rising to his full, intimidating height. Someone decided that violence was an acceptable response to yesterday's revelations. Someone believed that eliminating the human delegation would resolve their concerns about human involvement in galactic affairs. His golden eyes swept the assembly, and several delegates found sudden interest in their data pads. They were wrong, he continued. What this attack has accomplished is to demonstrate exactly why humans deserve a place at this table. When faced with superior numbers and firepower, their representative chose to protect her people rather than flee. She engaged professional killers on their own terms and emerged victorious. She's a trained killer, Corex protested, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. What else would you expect? I would expect her to retreat and call for help, Fenris replied calmly. I would expect her to prioritize her own survival over that of others. I would expect her to behave like most species do when faced with overwhelming odds. He paused, letting his words sink in. Instead, she demonstrated the fundamental characteristic that makes humans valuable allies. They will fight for others even when retreat would be safer. Ambassador Williams, who had been remarkably quiet since the attack, finally stood to address the assembly. The elderly diplomat's usual composure was somewhat shaken, but his voice remained steady. This attack was intended to intimidate humanity into withdrawing our application for resource access, he said. Instead, it has provided the most compelling argument for our inclusion in galactic affairs. Lieutenant Colonel Chen's actions tonight saved not just human lives, but probably prevented a diplomatic incident that could have destabilized this entire region. Chancellor Vex consulted his datapad, his crystalline features reflecting the chamber's lights in complex patterns. The Meridian Collective has completed its analysis of the attack. The professional nature of the assault, combined with the sophisticated intelligence gathering required to plan it, suggests significant resources and advanced planning. A conspiracy, Vera said bluntly from her position beside Fenris. Multiple species working together to eliminate human involvement through violence. Which makes the failure of that conspiracy rather significant, Fenris added. The Ghost Walker has reminded us all why humans survived their climb to interstellar status despite being physically weaker than most galactic species. They adapt, they endure, and they protect their own. The debate continued for another hour, but Zara could see the tide had turned. The attack meant to eliminate human credibility had instead provided the most dramatic demonstration possible of human capabilities and character. Fear was being replaced by respect, and respect was the foundation of genuine negotiation. As the session finally ended, Fenris approached her in the corridor outside the chamber. The Proxima 7 negotiations will resume tomorrow, he said. I suspect you'll find the other delegations more receptive to human proposals. Will the Lycans be supporting those proposals? She asked. His golden eyes met hers, and she saw something there that went beyond political calculation or diplomatic courtesy. Pact bonds are sacred, he said simply, and you've proven yourself worthy of the marking you bear. He started to walk away, then paused and looked back. The council voted while you were being debriefed. Humanity has been granted full membership in a galactic trade consortium with access to Proxima 7 and 3 other strategic resource systems. Just like that, he confirmed, though I suspect tonight's events will be remembered for a long time. The Ghost Walker has become something of a legend again. As he disappeared into the crowd of dispersing delegates, Zara touched the spot where her tattoo lay hidden beneath her sleeve. Kaldor's pack had believed that humans were worth dying for. Tonight, she'd proven they were worth living for as well. The mocking was over. The real work was just beginning.